Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this live stream event, Why a Circular Economy Makes Good Sense. By way of introduction, my name is Gabriella D'Souza, and I'm a Senior Economist with the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. And it is my great pleasure to be your host for this live stream. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country, of the lands on which we meet, where I am in the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd like to first welcome all of the excellent participants for this live stream today. To be able to host this at CEDA, but we also like to especially thank GHD for hosting this live stream today. Just a note to all of our viewers that are coming in at the moment that you can follow CEDA on Twitter at CEDA_news. And if you want to join today's conversation via social media, you can do that using the hashtag circular economy. We'd also like to invite you to participate via the Pigeonhole app. And you can see those details on the screen right now. The URL is ceda.pigeonhole.at and the password is circular. On Pigeonhole, you can enter your own questions or view and vote on the questions of others via the app. Would also like to again acknowledge that GHD are supporting this event, and without any further ado, I'd like to introduce and invite Lindsay Brown from GHD to make their opening comments and to introduce the rest of our participants as well. Over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Gabriella. Really appreciate the introduction. And hello, everyone, and welcome. My name's Lindsay Brown. I'm the Australian Market Leader for Water for GHD. I'd also like to take a moment to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that I'm calling from, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and pay respects to their elders past and present. We have an incredible lineup of speakers today who I'm going to introduce very quickly for you now. We've got Roch Sharu, the Managing Director of Sydney Water, Professor Veena Sahajwalla, the Scientia Professor and 2022 New South Wales Australian of the Year from the University of New South Wales. We've got Jamie Forsyth, the Director of Returner. Richard Kirkman unfortunately lost his voice and is an apology, so we have Tony Grebenshikov, the Vice President of Business Development, joining us from Veolia. Welcome. And Kate Dundas, Director of Strategic Foresight and Research from Sustainability Victoria. Welcome to all our panelists. This event is actually a direct hit for my area of personal and professional expertise, which is one of the reasons I'm so thrilled to be hosting. My sustainability journey has always been around the role of business in environmental, sustainable, and governance, ESG, although we didn't really call it that back then. Corporate social responsibility and CSR was really in vogue when I was first studying and getting involved in these issues right back from my undergrad in public policy and human rights, and then through my Master's of Corporate Sustainability that focused on sustainability decision-making in the urban water sector, which is one of the reasons why I love the water sector, the ultimate triple bottom line industry in my view, and I'm so excited to see it here represented among so many other important industries. So before we get started, I think it's worth asking the question, what is circular economy and why are we talking about it? And maybe that seems like a silly thing to say to a bunch of people who are obviously interested enough to get onto this call, but I think it's worth touching on. And although our speakers may offer their own definitions, I'll offer you the one from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is around circular economy being based on 3 principles and driven by design to eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials at their highest value, and regenerate nature. It's really around driving those triple bottom line outcomes through a systems thinking approach in the way that we approach design of our world. It has a history in the waste sector, obviously driven by some finite land limitations and the risks of disposal that we learned through environmental sensitivity and product stewardship programs really led the way for some of these things early, which we'll hear about potentially from Kate, and that cradle to grave focus on closed loop systems. We've seen it emerge in built environment where we've seen an increase of use of recycle and repurposed products, which I think Veena will have some interesting comments about. The water industry, obviously, as I mentioned, very close to my own heart, finding new inputs to existing systems that eliminate waste and reduce environmental damage, even if those sources aren't necessarily directly from within the water sector, which including food waste. And obviously, you can't think of a more circular system than water. And I'm sure Rock will have some interesting perspectives on that. And then, of course, we're seeing the emergence of new products, services, and technologies that Tony and Jamie can talk to us about as well. So there's really a richness of perspectives on this panel, touching all parts of the circular economy. And from where we sit, there's a lot of general agreement that circular economy thinking is a good idea, but how we're going to do it is a fundamental question, and at scale, and within the limits of a business case, shareholders, regulators, or others. And this is really at the heart of the question that we're asking today. At GHD, we grapple with this within our own business and with our clients, of course. And we've seen two really important themes that have emerged, and I'd encourage you to look for these in the chats that we're going to hear today. The first is the importance of taking small steps while keeping an eye on the big picture, things like pilots, local and regional action. We've seen things with projects we've worked on, Transport New South Wales Railway Station Accessibility Program called the Transport Access Program, looking for reuse and repurposing materials on site, Barwon Water and their positioning as a driver of regional prosperity and the regional organics network. And the second is new partnerships and powerful collaborations. And we see this as a really important step in moving things forward, breaking down organizational barriers, really looking more holistically at our systems. And the recent partnership announced by Sydney Water and Veolia, for two of our panelists today, will, I'm sure, touch on that. So really excited to get into this topic. Hopefully this whets your appetite on what's about to come. And with that, I'll welcome our first speaker. Rock, please take us away.
Thanks, Lindsay. Good afternoon, everyone. And let me also acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land and water that we are all sitting or standing on today. I'm on rural Adial lands, and I want to pay my respect to the elders past and present. So, Lindsay, I'm sorry. I know it's all about circular economy in general, but I wanted to focus on Western Sydney because there is a lot of very exciting things happening in Western Sydney and things that Sydney Water is obviously involved in. So about just 2 weeks ago now, I had the privilege of attending Parliament House with the Minister for Western Sydney to launch a white paper that is called Unlocking the Circular Economy in the Western Parkland City. And this white paper was developed by Sydney Water with a number of partners. And obviously the main partner was New South Wales Circular, but we had also 60 stakeholders from very different direction: government, business, industry, research, and other sector. And I insist on that because this is really important that we have as many parties involved as possible. So in this white paper, we propose 6 recommendations that will really help activate the local circular economy in Western Sydney, to make it real, to make it really concrete. And the 6 recommendations are quite diverse, and they range from setting targets and policy, obviously creating the necessary processes and systems and the incentives that we need to have in place. But really what they propose to do is to do things differently, and especially to do things differently with water and organic waste. So this is a sort of framework document that we propose for Western Sydney, a framework that will help every industry to move into circular economy and to implement it for real. In parallel to that, we are also working on a very, very concrete investment. So our next big investment in this region is an advanced water recycling center that will be situated at Camps Creek, which is not very far from the new Western Sydney Airport. So it's called an advanced water recycling center, but actually it's much more than this. It's more a circular economy hub, and that will generate value from the water, energy, waste, and agriculture nexus. So it's a very ambitious project. This center is one of our largest investments in terms of water resilience in the last 10 years. And to date, our largest investment in terms of circular economy enabling infrastructure. Full capacity, it will treat 100 million of liters of wastewater every day, so a significant one. It will receive not only water from the area, but also organic waste, and will turn all this into water, clean water, energy, and biosolids that can be used as fertilizer. And we're talking about sense. The UTS team has started to do some work for us and quantify some benefits. And I'll give you some numbers high level because the work is still ongoing, but sort of headline number, every $1 million that will be spent on turning food waste into energy will generate something like 2.7 million worth of value right across the economy. So that's a return about more than 200%, which I think is quite compelling to anyone listening today and to anyone in general. So where it's coming from, a number of different things. If you think about Western Sydney, about 1.5 million people more will be living west of Parramatta by 2036. That's about 150,000 tons of residential food waste and about 70,000 tons of commercial food waste every year. So just for scale, all this food waste is equivalent to about 36,000 African elephants. Just to give you an idea, 36,000 elephants. It's big. It's really big. And when you think about all this massive amount of waste that is diverted from landfill, out of landfill, this is a really great thing to produce something valuable out of this waste. So at full capacity, this center will be able to produce biosolids, as I said, in addition to water and energy. And simply the biosolids that will be used as fertilizers have got a value of something like 2.8 million every year. So again, generating a valuable product from waste. I said that the center will produce water, and when you think that there's an agri precinct that is being developed next to the airport, it's again thinking about circular economy, an absolutely fantastic opportunity. Very quickly going to talk about carbon emission. In water treatment, we use a process that is called biological process that is called anaerobic digestion. And from this digestion, we actually produce biogas, methane, and this methane will also be produced at the Advanced Water Recycling Center, and that will reduce emission from Western Parkland City by something like 19,000 tons every year, which is equivalent to about 1,200 people. This biogas will be able to generate enough electricity to power between 10 and 20,000 homes. So if you think about this center, which is really a circular economy hub, it's going to generate energy, it's going to generate biosolids, fertilizer, it's going to generate water, and it's going to do it in a very, very economic way. So I'm just going to stop here. There's a lot more that I could say about this fantastic investment that we're doing in Western Sydney.
Thanks, Rock. Fantastic. I'm sure there'll be loads of questions in Pigeonhole to bring to your attention shortly. Great to hear those really measurable benefits you were able to share with us. Next, we're going to hear from Veena. Veena, would you like to open your remarks? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lindsay, and thanks, Rock. It's a perfect segue into the kinds of things that I want to share with everyone what we do at Smart Centre at UNSW. The whole essence of what we're talking about here is really valuing these resources, which we of course label as waste. But if we're going to bring circular economy to life, we have to be able to use it in remanufacturing all kinds of products. And when we talk about remanufacturing, of course, typically people assume, well, if you're using waste, then, it must be lower quality. It can't be engineered to be high quality products. And this is exactly where I want to be able to kind of really show through some tangible examples that we've actually challenged that kind of myth that waste resources are not fit for high quality production. In fact, it's quite the opposite. When you look at the kinds of things that we've done, whether it is using waste glass, textiles, electronic waste, tires and plastics, all of these products that are there in our economy, we know very well that we have to find a way to bring circularity to life, but to do it in a way that is fit for purpose. It's not as if everything is a simple water bottle that you can just kind of put it back into a PET bottle recycling plant and go, right, the job is done now. But we've got to actually challenge the norm that says, well, there are so many other complex materials, even in the kind of ecosystem of plastics. You think about all the plastics that are highly engineered, and ironically, some of these are classified as non-recyclables, right? You look at this sort of whole category of plastics that is called category 7, the other as sometimes we read labels on it. What we've actually shown there is we can indeed not only convert them into plastic filaments, but we can actually do that at the right scale, do that so that in our micro factories, we can manufacture products that are fit for and are engineered to deliver the kinds of quality outputs. And let me hold up a couple of little examples. Let me start first with this. Now, I've talked about kind of 3D printing, and these are examples of kind of clamps that you can put into construction and various applications. 100% recycled plastics done in a micro factory where you could take those plastics, convert them into filaments, feed them into 3D printers, and you can produce products that can be engineered and they can be customized for a whole range of different applications. So we think about all kinds of things, whether it's the examples that Rock's been talking about, what's going to happen in Western Sydney, all the manufacturing that's going to happen there, the rebuild, and people living in that area. So it's about industries, people having all of those basic things in life. So industries might want this simple example of clamp fittings that we've manufactured for an industry partner who's using in construction projects. But you might say, well, that's all well and good. That's plastics. That's high quality production. Where do people come into all of this? And let me hold up another example. So here's an example of a green ceramic tile that we've been producing in a microfactory. Now, this contains waste glass and waste textiles. The reason why I bring that up is it's got actually such an important point to take into account. Think about all those builds and rebuilds that are going to happen, whether it's in Western Sydney or indeed, sadly, a lot of flood-affected areas in our state. How are we going to access those tiles, those fundamental tiles? I mean, if we're relying on supply chains where products are going to come into the country, we know, COVID has, if anything, taught us we need to build sovereign capability. We need to show remanufacturing happening right here. So a lot of these green ceramic tiles that we are making locally in our micro factories with regional factory settings is all possible. Again, the reason why I make that point is that if we are to decentralize and if we are to have all of these production capacities, whether it's in Western Sydney or some other regional communities, we're setting up micro factories in different parts of the state. We know that we can access resources. We can access waste textiles, waste glass, but can we actually engineer them to produce these high quality green ceramics? So these are the kinds of things I guess we have to challenge ourselves and ask, whether it is actually possible to achieve those engineered outcomes. The short answer is yes. We know very well that this is only the absolute tip of that iceberg. We've got a whole range of materials. Start to think about electrification. Everything that we talk about has to ultimately give us those goals of how we're going to decarbonize. So now we start to talk about all the things that Rock was mentioning, energy, how are we going to have our storage devices? So that then brings us into that notion that we've got to make all these kinds of products, energy storage, batteries, and so on, and bring them to life by using our feedstock of highly valuable materials in our electronic devices. So I want to give everyone a bit of a flavor that it is all possible. It's all happening right here in Australia. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, Vina. What a great optimistic note to end on. I love how you've introduced the wording of remanufacturing into our conversation today. I think that's going to be a great discussion point for later, and also this sense of securing our supply chain through increasing our sovereign capability. Some great ideas in there for us to chat some more about as we continue. Next, we're going to hear from Jamie. Jamie, I'm sure you've got some reflections on this, particularly around manufacturing. Please share. You're on mute, though.
My sustainability journey started in 2008 when I co-founded Keep Cup. And I've sort of been asked on today, I think probably because during that journey, where I've now started a business called Returner, I'm pretty sure that I've made every mistake there is twice. So hopefully I can supply you with some learnings. Just a bit of brief background. Returner designs and manufactures like reusable products and reuse systems. We have ready-to-go solutions for workplaces, public and private reuse schemes across food service, grocery, and personal care. Now, today I was briefed to sort of answer a question which was posed by the crew at CEDA, which, Josh, if you could pop up the slide, the question was why a circular economy makes good sense. Now, I'd probably start by trying to rephrase that question because in all circumstances, it doesn't make sense. And I think probably what will be more helpful for the viewers is to try and understand when can a circular economy make good sense and what conditions should you look for in a circular scheme that is basically financially viable. Now, there are significant challenges to meet, both supply side and at the same time consumer needs have to be met, which inevitably creates enormous trade-offs that you've got to navigate. Many enter this space kind of thinking that creating positive environmental outcomes will be enough, but I'd encourage you to think about the environmental action as basically the minimum buy-in to play, and that you need to ensure that you have a strong value proposition that supports your environmental action. As an example, at Returner, like we design products to create amazing user experiences. It should obviously meet technical needs, safety, ease of cleaning, insulation, venting, stacking, etc. The whole time looking beautiful, which means that the positive environmental outcomes are the primary mission of the business, but the surrogate outcome of the user experience. So when we are looking at reusable things, for clarity, Returner considers something circular when an item is reused and or recycled in a way that replaces itself. So a simple test for us is where the supply matches the demand. So as an example, if it was going to be a bottle, then what we would be aiming to do is, as each bottle is used, it is replaced with another bottle, not some other sort of downcycled product. Looking at the slide, you can sort of see that Returner, where we go for financial viability, we target high value, environmentally problematic single-use packaging. I slipped in a quick example there. There is a single-use coffee bag for whole bean, 250 grams. Basically, that product is landfill. So it clearly has a very difficult to recycle. It's often lined, poly, metals, etc. Ziplock at the top, and a single vent, which makes the mixed materials very difficult to recycle. It has a technical feature which is required for it to work. We always love products that have that because often in a reusable, you can add more value to the user by improving on that feature, which is often made cheaply because it's single use. And then the final thing, probably the most important thing, is we love a high cost. So that bag that's there would be costing a small coffee roaster around about $1 per unit. Now, the important thing about that is when you are considering creating reusables within your system is that every time you replace that or reuse something, that value pops out every time. And that value can be shared amongst the stakeholders. Returner might take some of that money, the customer might get some of those savings. There's lots of, the supplier might save on the packaging. You can string it together a range of different ways. The higher the value, the easier it is to basically make the whole system hum. We obviously always try and deliver a better user experience. So you can see in the example there, we've got the stainless steel canister. It's a beautiful object. We love a direct relationship with customers. This is something that can be created when you do create a reuse scheme. And the service, if you can get some traction around something, is likely to be sticky. People are going to come back to you. It's definitely a point of difference within your system. The other sort of thing that we look for often is what we call a short or closed logistics chain. So I always joke that the dark art of all reuse schemes is the return logistics. The businesses that nail that part of it will probably win the market, in my view. And so a short closed logistic chain would be someone like, let's say, a meal kit business or a delivery system where you actually control the logistics. So for every delivery, it can double down as a pickup. Obviously, or you create a system where the user is basically driving that return logistics. You could think about a keep cup where the customer takes responsibility, or you could think about maybe a system that might work with a hairdressing salon, a place where a customer always returns to on a regular basis, where a system can be implemented where they can actually physically return the goods themselves. Other areas that we love to target with packaging is where the customer is lobbying hard for a solution. You kind of do see that with meal kit type businesses, where there is certainly a group out there that will not buy from those businesses just due to the sheer level of packaging involved and it not meeting their values. And then we also love a place where government legislation is moving in. We see this more overseas than we do here in Australia, unfortunately. But I can cite as an example a product that is interesting for us, which is a gelato tub, a 1 litre. It's made of polystyrene. That's being banned in a number of states, not Victoria, unfortunately. And it is actually quite an expensive single-use piece of packaging. So that would certainly be a target for us. I'll finish up there because I've only got 5 minutes. But yeah, hopefully pepper me with some questions at the end. And if you don't get any answers, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and direct message me.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate those reflections, and great to have such transparency around the conditions that you see in the market that are creating opportunity. I love that theme of environmental outcome being a surrogate outcome of a great user experience. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about around that. Next up, we are going to hear from Tony. Tony, looking forward to your reflections on behalf of Veolia. You're just on mute, Tony. We'll just get you to put your mic back on.
It's on. Can you hear me now? Great. So good afternoon, everybody. And firstly, look, apologise on Richard's behalf. We do know that he's lost his voice, but the great thing about Veolia, we have one voice for our purpose. And what is that purpose? You know, we work across the waste, the water and the energy markets, but primarily around the waste today, I'd like to talk to you about, Australia generates 74 million tonne of waste per annum. That's a significant portion of waste. And we are a big player across what we do and very much driving the ecological transformation. What does that mean? We are deeply looking into the habits of individuals, economies, businesses, companies, and the way the communities interact, because those interactions and habits is what creates ecosystems and how they then flourish and not flourish. And so we're really understanding all those elements, and therefore we get it that once you have that clarity of interactions, you can then step into that value chain and determine and make a difference. Some 30 years ago, the first climate summit, there was lots of conversations about the circular economy. And interestingly, 30 years on, we are still talking and we're failing to act as a community and as a global entity living on this planet. You know, there is no plan B for our planet, and we strongly believe we need to act now and start making those changes. So what I've heard from Rock mention about the greener Western Sydney, that is so encouraging for us to be able to integrate those types of systems and strategies and infrastructure to drive change. But fundamentally, we have a view that we don't need new technology. You hear this often, that we've got to wait for new technologies to emerge before we can start the circular economy. You know, there's industries, when I mentioned 74 million tonne of waste generated, almost 20 plus million of that is construction waste, which has a high recovery and circular economy story. The biggest challenge, though, we have over 27 million tonne of waste still going to landfill across Australia. 14 million of that has an organic product. Rock's talked about how do we extract that value and get the energy and consumption out of it. So we don't need the technology. We have the facilities around the Australian footprint today across all the various industry players, right? And I'll give you an example. Household waste, what we all deal with and have a touch point every day. So we collect and buy products from supermarkets. We bring that to our homes, we unpack, and then what's not needed, we discard it. And typically the value to there is at that point. What if we change the focus and the mindset? Those manufacturers of those various products would potentially pay a few cents to discard that waste. Because at the moment, the way the system works is the local government have a rebate or a rate that they collect from each of us, who then pay for companies like mine to collect and dispose of that waste. People don't have a sense of belonging to it. When Vina was mentioning everything as a resource, everything has value. So how do we recreate that value in people's minds? And that's what ecological transformation is. It's what is the thinking behind those interactions? And how do we, as a mum and dad, as a family of 5, make sure that the big brands, the Coca-Colas, the Arnott's, and all these various companies have an association with the products they're manufacturing, and they actually pay for the disposal, but then they'll start to shift their thinking from disposal to circular because they want to cut out those costs. So there's a big shift. I don't think we need a technology. We're always emerging, and the technology is refreshing every 10 years or so. But I think the number one missing step is willpower, is the determination to really see this through, and how we as a enterprise, as communities, as customers, as stakeholders of each other's group can integrate and really set those policy settings. What's encouraging is, you know, there's some new policy settings out there around FOGA, taking organics out of landfill. That's encouraging, and we want to see things like that move forward. But for us, I think we have the money, we have the capital. Money is cheap at the moment to build and refresh infrastructure. We have the policy settings. Fundamentally, I would love to challenge all our listeners is, what are you doing to change a few habits tomorrow to commence this circular economy journey? And if we all start 1 or 2 habits a day, by the end of the year, we'll have 700 habits that are shifted and changed, and we'll start seeing the benefits of a circular economy. So in summary, I would say does a circular economy make sense? I would say we need a few cents and a bit of willpower, and circular economy will commence and thrive. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony, for those reflections. An excellent challenge you've posed to our whole audience today. Interesting to see willpower as the last important ingredient we need in getting a circular economy going. It'd be great to have some follow-up questions about that in Pigeonhole. We are going to round out our presenter comments with Kate from Sustainability Victoria. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm coming to you also from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I want to acknowledge that we live and work on the land of the world's oldest and most sustainable culture, and we have a lot to learn. I'm going to talk quite generally about the circular economy and what it is, and then talk to some of the things that the Victorian government is doing. So the linear economy is what the circular economy is not, is based on a take, make and waste model. And it's obvious that this is problematic for our environment. The whole system operates to convert our natural resources into financial resources and degrading the living systems that we all depend on. And we can see the result of that playing out now. The economic side of this linear economy doesn't really make sense either. Manufacturing things and products embeds them with value. We turn ore into metals that enable us to have smartphones and cars. We harvest wool or natural fibres to create our favourite pair of jeans. So if a part breaks, does that mean the rest of the product is now useless? Does a broken screen mean that the metal in our phone is now worthless? If we throw stuff away simply to replace it with something new, we're throwing away that value and we're throwing away opportunity. And I just love the work that Vina's doing to deal with some of that. In Australia, we're right at the beginning of a transition towards a circular economy, meaning it's prime time for businesses to get on board and start innovating by rethinking business models and the products and services that they offer to be more circular. And we've just heard about that too. The opportunity to capitalize on product or service differentiation is now. Our current economic system is set up to support that linear way of dealing with our resources, which hides a lot of the costs of externalities. The linear economy increases exposure to risks, such as notably higher resource prices and supply disruptions. Again, we're seeing that now. And rising volumes of waste and pollution. An increase in emissions, a lack of action on accelerated climate change carry an incredible health cost. And we've just found out that plastics have been found in human blood. A circular economic system enables savings and economic opportunity to the sound of billions. And research indicates an annual net material cost saving of up to 630 billion US dollars. And that's for the European Union alone. A user-centric economy, which we've also just heard about, will lead to increased rates of innovation, employment, and capital productivity, which are all, as we know, important multipliers to economic benefits. The circular economy is not just about the waste sector. It's about total economic reform, about how we design, how we use, how we think about the materials and products that we interact with. It's also not a dedicated decarbonisation approach. A circular economy does not specifically target a reduction in emissions, but emissions and materials are two sides of the same coin, and you can't have one without the other. So what are we doing about it in government? Sustainability Victoria's purpose is to accelerate Victoria's transition to a circular, climate resilient, clean economy. We're not the regulator or the policymakers, and I know some of the laws get in the way of what we're trying to do. At Sustainability Vic, we see ourselves as market enablers, and we action on this purpose through three focus areas: investment and innovation, behaviour change, and community action. And outside of SV, there's a whole suite of reforms happening across the Victorian government. And key to those is Recycling Victoria, a 10-year, $500 million action plan to transform our recycling sector, reduce waste and cut jobs. And a few examples of what we're doing is investing in a new waste data system to expand our waste data, what we collect, how we collect it, when we collect it, how we analyse it. And this will be enabled through the new Circular Economy Act, which will enable greater data collection powers. We're experts in behaviour change and embed behavioural insights and social research into our campaigns, programmes and projects. And we provide hundreds of millions of dollars of grants across industry, research and development, and community groups to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. Another example of a programme that might be interesting to some of the listeners here is the Circular Economy Business Innovation Centre. Lindsay, you mentioned how important partnerships and powerful collaborations are, and that's what we're trying to do at CBIC, cbic.vic.gov.au. It exists to support businesses to innovate and identify and implement circular economy opportunities and business models. So if anyone out there has got an idea, you can call us and get one-to-one advice with a CBIC representative. You can come along to some events, and we also have funding, so you can apply for some cash to get what you're trying to do up and running. If people want to find out more, please visit our website, or again, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well.
Thanks, Kate. Some incredible opportunities there for people, and great to see, putting some investment towards really building some of these new solutions. I loved the idea of throwing away value as a way of changing our mindset, and maybe something that will fuel some of Tony's Willpower discussion. We're now going to open to the Q&A. There's been a bit of activity in Pigeonhole, which I'm very excited to get to, but and I'll just remind you that is the way to access Pigeonhole. Please post your question or vote on other questions that you would like to see the answers to. But for the moment, I am going to exercise my privileges as panel moderator and ask my own question of the panel. And this is for all of our panelists. Last week, the European Commission presented a package of Green Deal proposals to boost circular economy through product lifecycle measures in textiles, market boosting for recycled construction products, consumer information protection against greenwashing, etc. Imagine for a moment that this panel was going to craft an Australian Green Deal to support a more circular economy. What measure would you recommend we consider and why? Not all at once.
I was going to say, Lindsay, for me, I mean, the answer is kind of obvious. You know, there is so much happening in our economy in terms of rebuilding, manufacturing, local capacity building. And, we do have the capacity right now to be able to say that if we could instigate, I guess something that says, look, you must have, 50% recycled content or 30% or whatever the case might be. But if the option is there, right? I mean, many a times the option is there, and I guess we sometimes do get a bit lazy because we continue with business as usual. And my point is, if the options are there, if technologies are there, and if you can kind of straight away go, here's an option, I either send my waste to landfill or I support, the rebuild activities in Australia by using more recycled content. I mean, if we can do that straight away, I think to me, any Green Deal is going to make sense economically, environmentally, as well as socially. Because I guess when we talk about ESG, the social benefits of doing something like that and boosting jobs in the region and enabling that to happen with the power that we hold in our own hands. Because remember, we're not just people who generate waste, we're also consumers. Whether we're, building Western Sydney airports, as large infrastructure projects, or whether we're doing rebuilds, we're consumers at the core of it as individuals, whether professionally or personally, we can make those choices ourselves. So I think we're all part of that circularity and the way of thinking. So I think we need to all play our part. And so I'd probably say you need to bring both economy as well as, I guess, the willpower. I guess Tony was talking about that. But I guess that commitment from our business leaders to make that happen.
So some commitment through targets and objectives. Rock, I know you're keen to weigh in next.
Yes, I think what Vina is saying is absolutely right. But there's a role for governments to set policies and targets, and that's not something that we currently have. There's also a role to facilitate different industries to work together, and we know that. If there's no structure around the different industries, it will be difficult. It will be difficult for example, the construction industry to have access to the agriculture industry, or to have access to the manufacturing industry, or to have access to the water industry, because industries are quite different and they're not operating in the same space. One of the recommendations that we proposed in our white paper was to create a one-stop shop where you can have actually the sort of exchange place between industries, where the construction industry can come and say, well, actually, I've got this amount of soil of this quality. Is anyone interested? I've got the material coming from the deconstruction of this old factory, which has got this percentage of aluminium, steel, etc. Is someone interested? And having this one-stop shop and the ability to have the exchange on between the different industries would be a great way to boost the circular economy and to make it real.
Fabulous. Some great insights there from our panelists. I'll give you anybody else who wants to wait in one more minute, and then we'll move on to Pigeonhole. Yes.
I'd say, Lindsay, that we should. An easy solution is basically just to levy single-use waste with some type of tax at the supply side, right up front, right built into everything else, and then the big users will it will shift the way in which they consider the waste, and it will level the playing field for everyone in terms of bringing in reusables or using recycled material in other products.
Great. And Kate, I can see you were keen to weigh in as well. Your contribution to our Green Deal.
So I would have a complete rethink of our design industry and make sure that we're designing for disassembly and designing things really well for a circular economy. And then the other thing would be to get rid of GDP and think differently about targets and measures and what it is that we're actually measuring, and measure the circular economy and our transition towards that.
Tony, anything from you to round out our panel?
I think it's we're all saying the same thing. So as my point before, a few cents up front by the big manufacturers and developers will then drive not a voluntary process, but a legislated process. If we have that commitment up front, then all of the parties here could ensure that we avoid going to landfill and avoid having a linear economy as mentioned. It becomes circular by its own rights, because that will motivate all people to work together to create those loops at all levels of the hierarchy.
Great. All right. Well, it sounds like we've got the bones of a fantastic proposition. I hope the right people are listening. I'm going to get to some of the questions in Pigeonhole, and there are a couple right at the top there. One is from Sherry around the responsibility of Australia and New Zealand in addressing their own domestic plastic waste rather than shipping overseas. Just a question to those on the panel who may have thoughts about this. Are we seeing more of that, I guess, taking a responsibility for those types of waste products? And I guess a related question from Harriet was, are we actually seeing a reduction of waste rather than moving to recycling? You know, how are we really taking measures to reduce the use, particularly of PET, rather than just recycling it? So really this question about our waste balance and what are we doing with it?
Yeah, I can start on that if you like. We have targets to reduce individual waste, along with targets to send, sorry, my dog on my knee, the others were fighting, just took him off. We had the China sword ban, so we are unable now to ship materials overseas, and the plastic bans are coming up soon. So there's been a hell of a lot of investment into the recycling sector and into manufacturing and remanufacturing materials onshore. So there's certainly a massive change in the sector. And yes, it's not quite as fast as we need it to be, but there's definitely improvements being made.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, look, I could probably just add around plastics in particular. On the East Coast, there's about 2.3 million tonne of plastic generated that goes through waste facilities and the likes. And the export bans are clear, and they're preventing mixed plastics and then eventually single polymer plastics unprocessed from leaving our shores. So the problem will remain on our shores. And what we're seeing is a significant approved and planned approval for infrastructure that will help process that to single polymers and flaking and washing. So then what we're hearing and having lots of conversations is the offtake market who are manufacturing or remanufacturing products are starting to define the specifications they need, because companies like ours received your yellow bin with lots of mixed rubbish and plastics and recyclables. We try and separate it again after it's been contaminated or mixed, and then we're trying to make a specification. So we're at that point where I think those specifications become clear, and then we can have an open competitive market where we can recreate those recycled products for reuse in the Australian market.
Yeah, I was actually just going to add to the point that ultimately we've talked about creating markets, but the markets are already here. I mean, we just have to be able to find a way to bring in more of that remanufacturing happening onshore. So whether it is about use of, high quality plastics, I mean, the kinds of examples I was giving earlier. So it's not just your infrastructure that you need in the consumer space around, PET and those kinds of everyday items. But I mean, quite often we don't see high quality plastic waste that's coming, for example, from our electronic sector, right? I mean, here we are working from home. There's a whole lot of high quality plastics in, our printers and toner cartridges and what have you. What you want to do is you want to put that back into remanufacturing. And therefore, the example I was giving earlier about putting it into 3D printing automatically means you've created that economy that is putting it into higher and higher order and value that you can get out of those. So it's about connecting the dots between the material, taking that material and bringing it into the hands of remanufacturers in the shortest possible distance without that cross-contamination. I think, Tony, you mentioned about cross-contamination. I mean, the best thing you can do for your materials is treat it like any other mined resource, right? I mean, you mine a resource, you value that resource, you understand its quality. And when you understand its quality, you can direct it to appropriate production opportunities. And let's face it, that's really what we're talking about here. Whether you're making steel or a high quality plastic, you have to understand that feedstock. And is it fit for what kind of production? Because you need to know the end market and the engineering that gets you that in market quality. And I think, to me, that's the language we need to start talking, taking it away from the fact that, hey, it's just something that needs to be so separated. I get that. That's important. But I think we need to be talking also about the more sophisticated end market, which is where values are. And I'm happy to report that many of our industry partners who work with us are actually already ahead of the curve, putting in a lot of these kinds of products that are made from recycled content into various projects. So I think we're already seeing that happening.
I'm going to have to round us out to the last question, if you can believe it. We're already there. I know this time would speed by, and it definitely has. Now, so I'm going to kind of mix a few questions together, including one of my own. So hopefully you'll indulge me. And maybe Jamie, we'll start with you first. But really, I mean, a lot of the themes that have come out today are around, looking for more action. We need targets, we need investment, we need legislative change, we need regulatory change. Obviously, those things all take time. And there's definitely comments in the chat around to the effect that we don't have time. We've been kind of going slowly and incrementally, as we've been going, but isn't it time for drastic change? If we can't afford to wait, what can we do?
Well, I think government legislation would be, like, I've seen it shift markets overseas, which we deal with quite regularly, and really shift the needle. But it takes a population that is going to push for those things. Like when you talked about the waste just before, in my view, we should be responsible for the waste we create as a country, and it's unethical for us to send it offshore. I've seen where that waste ends up often, and as far as I'm concerned, it should be a crime, basically, that we would send it off to some third world country and have it, try and sort it through on the shores of some river. So I'd like to see the government basically step up. They're the ones who could probably make some big changes, because when they move, big business has to move, and big business has got the money and the muscle to push things through very quickly.
Other reflections?
Well, I think that's true as the government here. But yeah, government regulation can quickly shift things, but it needs public support. And everybody that's in here is an individual making decisions, and an individual with purchasing power and political power. So it's up to every individual and every government to make better decisions.
Gotta love an election year for that, right, Kate?
You can tell that you can tell that viewer that I have given myself a lot of grey hair trying to make change quick, and I'm sure many of the other panelists here.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Rock?
Yeah, no, I think the combination of policies and targets and regulation and the willingness, the goodwill from everyone to participate they are the two key ingredients to make it work. But I think it's very clear. It's not tomorrow. It's now, and we need every investment that we're doing today, whether it's corporate, whether it's personal, we have to think about what we're doing, because I think it's time is running out, and there's no return. At some point there's no return. So that's definitely something that we have to do now. And if we don't get the regulation in place, if we don't get the policies and the targets set by governments, then nothing prevents us to do something still. And that's what we should be doing.
Back to your point, Tony, around no plan B for our planet. Is it time for radical action?
Well, I think, look, we need the policy settings. We've talked about that. But back to willpower. I mean, in your own experiences, we've all got these journeys and paths we've been on. But you think about change in your life, when it happened. The thing just before change was you're fully aware of the situation. And before you become aware, you need to get the attention of people around you, what is actually going on. And I think we are getting the attention of the communities of the big companies and the likes. It's like a 10-year-old at school. If they're not paying attention in class, they miss the whole learning. We as a community, are we paying attention? I think we are, and there's still a lot of opportunity. There's surveys recently I've read where only 4% of the populated surveyed individuals knew what the benefits of circular economy are, but once explained to them, it went up to 60%. So there's a big gap. So I think, we need to get the attention, make people aware, introduce those changes of habits at home. It starts at home. So then you take those habits to your business, and those businesses start to change the whole system. So I think there's a willpower piece, but there's also a policy setting, and I think we have the capital now and we have the desire. It's each and every one of us making a few changes a day, and we'll start to see this shift.
I think the other important point in all of this is that positivity around inspiration, where people who are the leaders in the space have also perhaps a role to play in inspiring the others to come on board. And I think, to me, that inspiration, who are willing to be out there and play that role of inspiration by sharing their stories. I mean, we've got examples of, green ceramic tiles going into places like Sydney Olympic Park, and those are small examples. But I think, to me, if we hadn't had that opportunity, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to get these actions happening. So I think, to me, it's about action. We've talked about that. It's about inspiration. And I think all of this is all of us as human beings wanting to share our stories. And I think, to me, the power of inspiration cannot be undervalued. So I'd probably say, to me, that's an important piece as well. As human beings, we want to hang on to hope. And so I know, as much as there's a lot of talk around doom and gloom and all of that, but great examples of lovely things people are doing across the world. And I think we want to probably share more of that.
Well, I can't think of a better way to close than that, Veena. I think you have all doled out that inspiration in spades, and the way that you've also generously shared your stories and the journeys that you've been on in towards taking those small steps that lead to big changes, being open to piloting and testing, to new types of partnerships, all the things that we talked about at the very start. I think you've really given our whole audience a lot to think about, not just in terms of the big picture things that need to change, but also the small picture things that we individually can do, and the hope that we can bring to the discussion by the small actions that we can take that really do add up. So thank you so much for being along today and being on our panel on behalf of GHD. Again, I just want to thank you all, and I'll hand over to Gabriella to close.
Thanks, everyone. I have the rather unenviable task of trying to make some closing remarks, because I just enjoyed so much of that conversation. I thought there were so many cool themes around it. And really liked Lindsay's introduction around clarifying what the circular economy was, and looking at how speakers have tried to affect that change in their own workplaces. From Rock, we heard about the focus on of Sydney Water on Western Sydney, with some really impressive and concrete numbers about what's really at stake. Particularly like the conversion to elephants. I thought that was quite good. And then from Veena, it was great to see some of the practical examples of how some of that is being incorporated into one of our biggest waste industries, which is in construction. From Jamie, it was great to hear some of the strong value propositions that are in play here. And as an economist, thinking about how we actually tax carbon and how we actually tax, the things that aren't good for the environment, for the economy. So I really appreciated that perspective. Obviously, the legislative framework has been a bit lacking in that area, but hopefully over the next couple of decades, as we get closer to a net carbon 2050 framework, that will improve. It was really great to hear from Tony as well about some of the philosophy around wastewater energy and the real urgency around wastewater and energy being the Viola's focus, and the real urgency around failing to act, and the fact that there is no planet B. And also just noting that we don't need new tech. We do have all the tech that we need to be able to make these changes now. So that's my very quick roundup of what's happened today. Again, I would like to sincerely thank all of our participants. for their contributions. I'd also like to thank GHD, our live stream sponsor today. Your support definitely allows us to continue to have these important conversations as we move on to an election, and also as we move on to a future where we can decarbonize effectively and can reduce waste. Now, I'd like to also thank the audience for their participation in the discussion. And this discussion has been recorded and will soon be immediately available via your live stream link and on the CEDA website next week for you to share with your colleagues and your network. I believe that's now time. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, I will close today's proceedings. Thank you very much.